working very hard for our money. So now let's give it that extra line of care of like, how do we really pay attention to it so we can grow? So I think.
All right, Rising Man family. Got another guest joining me here today for the first time on the Rising Man, Chris Hempstead, coming in live from LA, La La Land. How's it going, man?
Good, Jeddy. How are you, man?
I'm great. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, as folks will have listened when in the introduction that we recorded just before this. You've been helping me out tremendously and in my finances and just the financial conversation. And I know that's something that is really important for all humans, but especially men in my generation. It seems like a really evasive topic. So I'm grateful that you agreed to jump in here, because I think it's going to be really valuable for a lot of guys.
Cool. I appreciate you asking. Should be fun.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, before we jump into all the financial juiciness, I always ask my guests this question when they come on the show, and that is, what does it mean to be a man?
I think what I learned about that is, when I think about that question, for me, it's being in relationship with other men, and being open and not being afraid to be vulnerable. And I think the biggest growth for me was leading, coming from a place of leadership, also in my family unit, and that third entity, as opposed to just kind of defaulting to, well, what do you think? And what do you think? And so I think that's really been the growth for me, is really owning more of my power or myself in different relationships, both in my marriage and then also with other men and people in the world. So I think it's a strong place and a needed place right now, especially for men of integrity and authenticity and vulnerability. So those are where I try to come from.
Well, I'm a big fan of leadership. Anytime someone throws the L word around, I'm in. And I agree with you. I think that's been a big part of my own discovery, is finding all the different areas in my life that leadership is available and shows up. Because growing up, I was a sports guy, athletic background. So leadership to me was captain of the team.
Yeah,
that was I didn't really look at leadership through many other lenses. Maybe leadership in terms of like being the president of a club or president of the United States, but looking at myself as a leader of my own life, or leader of my household, leader of my community, those were all distinctions that I didn't have till later on in my adult life. So
yeah, and I think bringing people along, not just and saying, "Hey, we're going this way, and I'd love for you to come with me. This is the vision I have for it," rather than kind of a dictatorship, which I know I've fallen into as a father and in other areas. So, that's a key piece. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, there's another word that I heard in your description of what it means to be a man, and you didn't say it directly, but I heard decisiveness, and I think that's actually a good leverage point to move over to our topic to today, because I know that one of the things I've struggled with as a man, especially as an adult, is decisiveness and making decisions. If I'm being really transparent and honest, there's still moments in my life where internally, in my head, there's a voice that says, I wish somebody would just tell me what to do. I'll put all my energy behind it. I'll devote and commit myself 100% to it. I wish somebody would just tell me what to do. And where I've been grateful for having a men's team and having some of the background that you and I share is that's never what the men in my life offer me. They know that they wouldn't rob me of making those decisions and having to deal with the consequences on my own merit. So what is it about decisiveness, just in regards to becoming the type of leader you're talking about, and even just stepping into our full power as men, that's so important?
Yeah, I mean, there's a phrase that says doubt kills the warrior. So when we are hesitant, and I think it's natural to be afraid of fear, afraid of failure. I think it's natural to be afraid of failure, and we all don't want to have those failures. It's not a good feeling. But I've heard a phrase a while ago that says, no education is free. So even when you make a mistake, you learn from it. And I think the decisiveness can come from, hey, I'm in action, I'm moving towards something. It's not life or death. If I need to make an adjustment, I will. But ultimately, that's where I try and that's what helps me, because I can overthink as well. For sure, I'm an overthinker, and so it's just moving out of that place of indecisiveness and kind of spinning out mentally to, I think this is the direction. Let's go for it and just try it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love what you're saying there. And it does always come back to that relationship between fear and doubt. They're like the twin bullies on the playground that you're just like, oh man, I'm going to get my ass kicked again by fear and doubt. Here we go.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just before, so I want to obviously start steering our conversation towards your area of expertise. Before we do that, would you just shuttle off a little bit of your history, some of your credentials when it comes to finance and what you do for a living now?
Sure. So, I had a bit of a unique path into the career. And so where I started, I was born and raised in St. Louis. So I'm Midwest, St. Louis, Missouri. And then I moved out to LA, at 23, and really kind of grew up out here, from manhood and into manhood. So, and really what I originally moved out here to pursue was the entertainment business. And I was focused on that for a long period of time. And
specifically what? Acting, music?
So initially acting, and that's where I met my wife, was in an acting class. So
cool.
I got the great prize there because she's extraordinary, and neither one of us are in the entertainment business anymore. But yeah, so she's amazing. So we've been together almost 24 years, married almost 20, and we have 2 kids, 17 and 15. So by far the best thing in my life, without question, is my relationship with her. So, so that's the relationship background. And then, was really kind of becoming tired of, so much is out of your control in the entertainment business. So I was focused on feature film production and reading books and scripts and finding financing. And then, essentially just married, 2 kids in a very expensive city. It just wasn't working financially. It was a very, very difficult struggle. And so it was really my dad, one Christmas, was out here visiting, and he's like, your work ethic is very high. Your integrity is off the charts. People like you and trust you. And I think you could do well in the financial planning space. And so, it wasn't a new idea to me in that I have a lot of family. So the company I work with is Northwestern Mutual, and I have a lot of family with the company. So my uncle was with the company for 50 years. So I kind of grew up watching him and his lifestyle. And then my brother, my sister, and my cousin are all with Northwestern. So it's kind of a family affair. And then, I transitioned and started my own practice, and that was 10 years ago. So I built my practice out here in LA. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's just dig into that a little bit, because I didn't actually know that part of your story. So
yeah,
you made your way into a whole new career. Mm-hmm. You're already raising, if I'm doing my math correctly, a 5 and a 7-year-old, if we're talking 10 years ago. Yep. So you already have a budding family, and then stepping into an entirely new career. Just talk about that transition. What was that like? What came up for you? How'd you navigate it?
It was intense on a lot of levels. So I think that the 2 levels that come up for me is, one, really mourning the loss of the dream. Like, I really thought for sure I would be a producer and I'd make movies, and I love telling stories and I love movies. And that was extremely difficult to come to terms with. That was not going to happen. Mm. And then alternatively, starting a business, because you don't get handed a book of business, you build it. And it's like, hey, reaching out to family and friends and getting referred to other family and friends of theirs. And so this circle of, you just keep drawing it wider and wider. And that's how you build your clientele. And so there's a lot of hustle involved, and, having that faith to kind of bet on yourself as an entrepreneur and as a business owner is major. So super scary. Wife was incredibly supportive. And yeah, had to earn and grow it quickly because I had 2 young kids. So it's an amazing thing, and it was very scary. But so a lot of help, asking for help, a lot of tears,
Yeah.
and but looking back 10 years from now, or 10 years from that point, it's made it totally put me on a totally different trajectory for my family and what's possible for us.
Yeah, well, it's certainly something I can relate to. I don't know if you know this part of my background, but I was a physical therapist by trade. I think I actually was working in physical therapy when you and I first met. And to transition careers into something entirely different with the skill set that obviously I had been building, but had no evidence that I could actually provide for a family from it. And it took time, exactly what you said, right? I wasn't so much mourning the loss of the dream, because I actually feel like I moved closer to my dream in the transition that I made, not further away from it, but definitely asking for help, building something entirely new, also building something that doesn't really have a roadmap to follow, or there's no manual, especially anything in the entrepreneurial space. So yeah, I can relate to that. And it's nice to hear that part of your journey. Now, I imagine getting into finance is it's a pretty big departure from entertainment. What were your stories or beliefs about finance? What was your own financial health or outlook like when you first got into it?
Yeah. So I was not making a lot of money, as a producer, and I had a day job. So I was working in a file room at a law firm hourly, and really doing the side hustle thing, and so not strong financial picture, and so the I guess the goal was, hey, this is not what I want for my life and my family. So how can I make a change and make a change quickly? So that was ultimately where I looked at the financial services space. And, my upbringing, my dad was an attorney. My brother's a CPA. My sister also went into the career. So there was always dialogue around, we need to be saving money. And that's just, you got to save money every month on some level, and easier said than done, no question. So having that discipline, but it was instilled in me early on to be like, hey, if you have a 401k at work, you got to save into it. If there's a match, you got to take advantage of the match. Even when it seemed like, are you kidding? I'm married with 2 young kids in Los Angeles. Like, it's super expensive. I'm making like 40 grand a year. No. Mm-hmm. And they're like, no, you have to do this. You have to. And so, just like any other habit, you kind of build it in, and it becomes automatic at some point. But so that was instilled in me, like, hey, let's budget. My mom was a huge cutter of coupons. She loved the bargain. But I think from a mentality of, I mean, those were lean times, and I probably one of the most something I never want to relive again is, it seems simple in the moment, but it was devastating at the time. We were very paycheck to paycheck and going into debt, and we were my wife parked at a meter overnight, and we'd forgotten to move it when the time was to feed the meter. Mm-hmm. So we go racing out there, and the person's already giving us a ticket, of course. And I don't remember what the ticket was. It could have been $15. It could have been $70. But at the time, it was like devastating. And my wife is like crying as we're moving the car. Mm. And I'm like, I never want to feel this again.
Right.
I never want to feel this again. So, so that is what, on a small level, what drives me to, like, hey, I got to reach out to people and be proactive in reaching out to them and say, hey, are you open to a call? I'd love to talk to you. Let's see where it goes. And so that's how that cycle, but it can take some time to get out of the scarcity mentality. Sure. And so that's really kind of been my journey of, okay, what's the next level and how can I start building it up from here?
Well, Thanks for sharing that story, man. Those are the types of vulnerable and honest shares that I think are so valuable, because we all have them. We all have those moments. And I know I said to you before we started recording, one of the best things I ever got from the men's workspace is remember that I'm not unique, that, where can I see myself in another man's story? Because we're all there. What a powerful memory to have, the fact that that's stuck with you all these years, and just, and that also you found a way to motivate from that place. I know my own experiences, and I know the experiences of people I'm close with. It's interesting. It's always interesting to me how money is often a conversation that people really guard themselves around. It's certainly not something you lead off with. Here's how much I make. Here's how much debt I'm carrying. Here's my portfolio of assets. Right. It's not like the typical conversation starter. And so, but it's always interesting to me is, well, why not? And I think that piece of, I don't know if you just mentioned it now or if you had mentioned it previously, the feeling of shame that comes up with not being able to really just own the circumstances or situation that we're in. So let's talk about that first, because I think that's where it'd be a good place to start off. I'm going to read off a couple of stats here, just because I think sometimes data helps. I looked this up. This is from Lexington Law. I'm not a big financial researcher, but they did some good homework. They compiled these stats from different places. And I was interested in exposing the millennial financial tendencies. I don't think this will be any news to you. I'm sure you know all this stuff, but these are all averages. So the average spending for millennials is $52,000 a year, which means that anybody who's making $50,000 a year is either going into debt every year, or they're, like you said, living paycheck to paycheck, right? Virtually no savings coming out of that. Average savings for millennials is about 9.8%, which that's something we can get into a little bit later. Average post-tax income is $58,000. So I guess that's the average they're determining from, is how much people are making on average and how much they spend. And then average credit card debt, which I know this is a big one. It's $4,700, so $4,700 as the average for millennials. And the averages, it's interesting ranges. So younger millennials, so on the younger side of that generation, the average is more like 2.2K, so $2,200. The older millennials, so I guess like the 80s babies, the average is $6,600. So on average, the older millennial generation, there's it's interesting if you try to look at the data and interpret the narrative. But the last one, which I think is the most important one, is over half of millennials report that they live paycheck to paycheck, meaning if a paycheck didn't come in, they wouldn't know how to pay for what they need to pay for. So just laying that all out there, are these all things that you're aware of, and how do you interpret that? What's the narrative you derive about this generation and our financial literacy based on the stats?
Yeah, I think so. As you said, I live in California, Los Angeles, and it's very easy to get kind of skewed on what the average income per household is. And I do work with people all over the country. And so the average income per household is around 63 grand, which, is so essentially if you're making 100 grand, 150 or more, you are in you kind of like 1 to 5%. And so I think the challenge is, how do we budget? How do we think through finances? And I think it can be very difficult to live within your means. It's very difficult to have delayed gratification, or to kind of target, hey, I want to save up for something. And the typical way is I'm going to buy it, and then if I can't afford it, I'll put it on credit card, and then I'll pay it off as I'm making money. And that can be dangerous. So I think that, the paycheck to paycheck thing is very difficult. And ultimately it does really, there's always exceptions, but I think a lot of it comes down to what kind of discipline do I have around saving for myself. And that can come up from a self-worth issue of like, hey, I'm not really worth it, because I work with a lot of people who actually, when they get money, they give it away. Like, oh, they need it more than I do, or and so that self-worth is major. And that's something I've really worked on myself as well. Like how I really need to honor myself. This is a way to honor myself by saving money.
Well,
So,
let's, I want to spotlight the living within your means conversation, because I know for myself and for my wife, that's something that there's a couple of variables I believe that are at play. So a little bit of context, a little bit of history. My wife and I met 10 years ago. We got engaged the following year, married the year after that. The year that we were getting ready to get married, so 8 months before the wedding, she got laid off. They did a round of layoffs at her company, so she lost her full-time job. Up until that point, I was making a comfortable and predictable salary. So was she. Our collective expenses were still very minimal. No children. That was a big factor. We were, and we both were employed, and we were, making a consistent income. The moment she got laid off, there was something that happened that clicked in me, which I kind of trace it all the way back. We're talking 8 years ago now, but something happened in me where I said, hey, listen, I didn't want her to worry about it. And my solution for her not worrying about it was, I trust myself. I'll bet on myself. Don't worry, babe. I got it covered. When really, I didn't really know what I was doing. It was kind of the way I've handled other things in the past, where I said, you know what? I trust myself to figure it out. I always have up until this point. I'll bet on myself and I'll find a solution. So don't worry about it. In the process of planning for a wedding that was more expensive than we really could realistically afford, that was the first example of us going outside of our means. We got pregnant 3 months after that, or after the wedding. So later that year. And then we kind of got into this, what I think is the treadmill that just keeps going faster and faster. And you don't, even when you start to pick up, like you start to catch your breath and speed up a little bit, somebody jacks up the speed on the treadmill, and then you're still running for several more years. I'm talking about going into several tens of thousands of dollars worth of credit card debt. My wife still has student loans that haven't been paid off, always feeling like we could never quite save money. We would save and burst, and we'd be like, oh my God, look, we have, $20,000. And then all of a sudden, before we know it, we're like, we got nothing again. What happened? And we've been doing a lot of work together to really track what happened. What have we been doing? What are the financial habits that we inherited from our families? And how has that shown up as we've had our own families? Because before we had kids, we didn't have any credit card debt. We didn't have anything like that. So back to this idea of living within your means, I think that's a really important thing to consider. Where do people, where do you even start with people? Because to live within your means, to me, that's very subjective. How do you make that more concrete and objective?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the hardest things to get people to do would be to sit down and do a budget. And I struggle with it myself, and certainly if you're single, it's a little easier to track. If you're in a relationship or a marriage, it is typically a challenging point to come together on. And so, because what I value may not be the same things that my wife values, and vice versa. And so this is where the dialogue really is important to have. And I love that you had the experience of like, hey, don't worry about it, I got it. And now just knowing you and how much you are in communication with Carrie, that now you're on better financial ground, because you're working together as a team. And I think that's super important when there's a couple dynamic. So I do think it is important, and it's not fun or sexy to be like, hey, let's sit down and track my budget, and really kind of take ownership of where is my money going. And then this can lead into intentionality, which if you are targeting something that is important to you, you'll have more focus on saving towards that thing, rather than, oh, I feel like I'm making money. So you're a little looser with your what would be referred to as frivolous spending, and there's not as much intentionality and focus on, well, what do I really want? And so that's really where I think to slow down it's funny you mentioned treadmill. One of the things I say is like, we want to take people off the treadmill of life once or twice a year to slow down and plan, because we're all overwhelmed with our life and feel so busy. And so that's like, hey, I need to pay attention to this, because we're all working very hard for our money. So now let's give it that extra line of care of like, how do we really pay attention to it so we can grow? So I think working within a budget is important. And look, every month's going to be flexible, but or fluid, but for the most part, you can hone in on, here are the basics. And then you'll get a sense of, how often am I going out to eat? Is it too much? Can I pull that back? And, be mindful of like where money is going, I think is the first step. And then you can start to, is that really that important to me? Online subscriptions for movies, like the television. We cut out cable. We're not really watching it. We shut it off. That was $200 a month. So, these different things can add up. So it's important to be intentional around your money.
Yeah. Which I think has been one of the biggest learnings for me personally. And I think I told you before we started this episode that I think the most valuable thing we can do is to begin normalizing the conversation of finances. What I like to do in this space is to share it, expose it. Let's eliminate the shame of it, but not excuse that. I want to give that disclaimer. I'm not saying that this is acceptable or is something that anyone should strive for, but for me, one of the biggest things I came to realize was how much of my financial behaviors developed as a way of trying to do what I thought would make my wife happy, or what I thought was going to make her feel more safe, when in reality it was irresponsible. It wasn't taking care of a long-term picture. We didn't even really have a long-term picture. We were living very much moment to moment. And my wife is also 6 years older than I am. So factor that in, she's got even less tolerance to her timeline than I do. And so because it all started to change when we got married, there was something that flipped over in me. It was like, and I look at it, I think it was playing out what I saw my dad do, but he always had a financial plan. He just never told me about it. So I was like, oh, it doesn't seem like my dad ever questions my mom on what she's spending. So I guess I should just focus on making more money, so there's enough there for whatever she wants to do. Whereas that wasn't exactly the position that I was in. And having some harder conversations around, hey, like, what do we really want to do? Like you mentioned intentionality, bringing more clear focus and more deliberateness to where each dollar we earn is going and what it's setting us up for. Saying, hey, well, let's not go on any of these trips this year so that we can do this big thing that we want to do next year, or so we can afford a house in 4 or 5 years from now, whatever it is. That's something that Carrie and I really have come around to. And it took us a while, because for a while, our solution was, let's bet on ourselves again, right? Either go into debt or spend beyond our means and then find a way to make the money, which we got really good at generating more money, more income. We've made collectively more money every year since we've been together, which is, I think, not something everybody can say. But we've also don't really have much to show for it, because every time we did that, we kept raising the bar on our, like, kind of loosening up the belt on our spending. So, and I know that's probably not an unfamiliar story.
No, I mean, yeah. So I'll loop it into one of the statistics that you were talking about. You said the millennials are on average saving about 9.8% of their income. So I think it kind of historically, you can be told that, hey, if you save 10% of your income, you'll be okay. And really, because people are living longer, so that's the biggest thing. We don't know when we're going to pass away. And so what does financial success look like? It is, hey, when I retire, I can maintain my current lifestyle and not run out of money before I pass away. That's kind of the basic goal of like, hey, this is what we want to create. And so I think that number needs to be typically higher than 10%. And so helping people understand the math behind that. And so if you're making, so I'll just make this up, 20% of your income, and you're making 50 grand. So that's one number, and you're maintaining that lifestyle, but then people make 75 or 100 grand. So that 20% is now more than it was when you were making 50 grand.
Right.
So what typically happens is they keep that at 20%, but they have an increase in lifestyle.
Mm.
And look, we all want to live for today. Totally get it. And so that's why the intentionality of what is it that we really want is important. And that's always where we start. Like, what are the goals? What is really important to you? And how important is it to you on a scale of 1 to 10? Like 10, this is super important, or 4, nah, it's a nice to have, not have to have. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the education part of it, is helping people understand who are in their 20s and 30s, because it can be so easy to be like, 60 years old when I retire, 65, that's so far away. Like I can't even pay attention to that. Mm-hmm. But if you start understanding the power of compounding interest, I think it was Albert Einstein who said the 8th wonder of the world is compounding interest. Mm-hmm. So the earlier you can start saving something on some level, you're building the habit, and then it's going to compound because you have the as you mentioned, you have more time. So that's our biggest commodity, is time, and then having a compound. So, but what I love is that you and Carrie are in relationship about it, because what I really find in relationships is it can become very adversarial very quickly. Mm. And that is very toxic ground. And so remember it, we are teammates, we are partners. Mm-hmm. This is hugely important. And so when we can come together and say, hey, this is important to me, then it can be easier to have those conversations to say, hey, we're not going to travel this year because we have this goal. Mm-hmm. Rather than, well, let's just travel this year and we'll figure it out, or you can easily compromise other stuff. And so that's where the value of having the dialogue, hey, we want to be saving this amount of money towards our future, and also have short-term goals of, hey, we want to take a trip in 3 months or 6 months. Because what can happen, just like on a diet, like, hey, I'm starving. Forget it. We're going all in on this trip. Boom. And so anyway, so that's what comes up for me when you have that conversation, how important it is to be in relationship around it.
Yeah. Well, I come from a healthcare background, like I mentioned before, and I was always taught prevention is the best medicine. And so when I think about what you're saying when it comes to couples, I'm thinking about the guys who are not yet in long-term partnership, right? Who haven't yet made that commitment to partnership with an individual for a lifetime. That is the time to build those healthy financial behaviors and habits. And I'll be the first one to admit, I remember when I was in my 20s and I started making money, and the company I was working for offered me a 401k, and I was like, I gave them the finger. I was like, screw you guys. I want every last dollar. What am I? I'm 23 years old. What do I need a 401k for? Nobody could tell me anything. I didn't care what anybody had to say about that. That's the way I looked at it. And I really didn't build up those healthy habits. My parents, they started to get me on a good track. I always paid down my credit card bill every month. I had a credit card, but I always paid it down every month. Yep. It wasn't until I got into a relationship with Carrie, and then I allowed my financial habits to change. That was like the biggest, if I could go back to linchpin for me, was I allowed my financial habits to change when I got into partnership with her, because I wasn't willing to have those uncomfortable conversations with her. I was at that point, I didn't know how to say no to my wife. I didn't know how to say, hey, listen, honey, we can't afford this right now. I didn't have any game. I didn't know how to enroll her in a future vision, delayed gratification. I was just like, let's throw it on a card. Yep. This is the path of least resistance. And so before even getting into those relationships, I think it's good to build one's own healthy financial habits and patterns if you're not yet in a partnership.
It starts with you.
Oh, totally.
For sure. Well,
it starts with the individual. And then when you're looking for a partner and you have those healthy financial habits, you can speak about those things. Hey, this is my outlook on finance. I want to retire when I'm 55 years old, whatever it is. What do you think? What do you think about saving money? And find somebody who's more compatible with that, because I don't think Carrie and I weren't on completely separate galaxies with finance, but we definitely had some ground to cover to come back together and figure it out. Thankfully we did. And I would say a lot is in part to the help that you guys have given us and just given us enough of a roadmap to find our way. But it's a lot harder to do that. Whereas, finding somebody who matches your vision before you make those commitments is also, I think it's just a little easier.
No doubt about it. It is it's such a difficult conversation to have because you're in love, you're super attracted to each other, like all these great things are happening. And so kind of the last thing you want to do is, well, let me bring some disturbance to this relationship by seeing, hey, are we compatible long term, financially, spiritually, whatever it is, all of those points, health wise, are everybody has different lifestyles in that regard, and so it can be very difficult to bring that to the table. And so that is a major piece that can make life a lot harder when you guys aren't on the same page.
Yeah. So I also, big intention I had for this conversation was, I hope that when men listen to this conversation, their guard around their financial situation starts to lower. I know a lot of guys I talk to, it's still one of the edgiest things for them to discuss. And it was not easy, the first conversations that I had with you and your team, to say, hey, here's where we're at. Here's how much debt we're carrying. Here's what it looks like. Cause it's like getting naked, but it's a different kind of naked, right? I'll take my clothes off faster than I'll show you what's in my bank account.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel that way too. So maybe you could speak a little bit about, I would just like, for whatever you'd want to say to somebody who might be feeling that way, what would you say to them to encourage them to consider working with somebody like you, or even working with you? Because I think it's just a matter of getting your foot in the door and starting to find a solution instead of hiding away from this big, scary dragon.
Totally. So a friend of mine, he's a therapist. He's big on shame. And the more you hide things away, the more the darkness grows, and the more you can bring some light to it, the more it can go away. So much shame for all of us around money. Am I earning enough? Am I supporting? Am I provider? I mean, these things are like programmed into us as men, and it can be very easy to affiliate your self-worth with your bank account, and that's a super difficult road to navigate when that is how you identify. So I think it's another reason why I feel like people have shame around it is because everybody can make money, but they think, well, I can make money, I should know how to save it or invest it or grow it. And that's just not the case. I mean, we're just not taught hardly ever around money, unless it's in our family or somebody that we have a mentor that's like, hey, this is how I think, I've built my wealth, or this is how I have saved. So I think it's super important to ask for help. I just think it's so critical because we all get emotional around our money. So, my own personal money, I don't manage it because I'm emotional around it too. But somebody else's money I can manage because I'm objective about it. And I'm like one step removed from it. But even my own money, I can get clouded in my own vision of like, hey, whatever, cause that hesitation, cause that indecisiveness. So I think it's super important to have an objective third party. And then, from a financial planning situation, there's so much information now. I mean, that's one of the great things about the time we're living in is you can access any information. The challenge is not all of it is good information. And so, and truthfully, the financial services industry is not notorious for being super transparent and trustworthy. You kind of get highlighted around, the Madoff scandal and this and that and hidden fees and all these things. And, ultimately, I still think it's important to have a conversation with somebody and get an understanding of what are the steps, because it just helps to have it laid out, and it can kind of take that valve of steam of pressure and shame and kind of release it. Okay, now it's on the table. What can we do to move forward? And do changes need to be made? Whatever.
And I don't know if it's just me. I'll assume that it's not. That the worst part of the whole sequence is not knowing. As soon as I lay things out and I'm having it reflected back to me by somebody like yourself, somebody who knows more about this than I do, and there's this moment where you say, okay, Now we know what it looks like. Now, where do we go from here? That there's a visceral shift in my body that says, oh, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I'm not going to get my head bitten off right now. There's literally that threat of danger that I've felt in my life. Finances, it feels like death in my body. It literally feels like there's something or someone hunting me down all the time. And until I turn around and look and realize that there's either nothing there or it's a squirrel instead of like a huge gorilla that wants to bash my head in, then that's the moment where I say, oh, okay, great. Well, now at least it's here. I see it. It's numbers on a screen. It's not emotions in my body. What's the first step? Where do I go? That's usually the biggest shift that needs to happen, but sometimes it's the hardest to get to because there's this buildup of what if I turn around and it's a gorilla and I get my brains bashed in? Well, then at least you turned around and you got your brains bashed in facing off with the gorilla instead of letting it sneak up from behind you. But I mean, in your experience, have you ever found somebody that once you look at the numbers and on the screen and what's actually there, that there wasn't some sort of solution through it?
No, there's always, the challenge is, when we can talk to people in their 20s and 30s and even their 40s, but if there is no habit of savings built in, I've literally talked to people who make $1 million a year and spend 1.3, and they're in their 50s and they've never developed that habit of saving. And so those are difficult conversations to have when you're like, you will never retire, and you will most likely be running out of money here very soon. Right. So that's what I want to try and avoid, is helping people just like, hey, let's just put it on the table. Let's see if there's any tweaks we can be making. And there is a path forward, but it just is going to take time, and it's not an instant fix, but let's just start talking through it and see what resonates for you. And I can come to the table with a couple different ideas. And if you're like, I like this one, I don't like that one, then fine. But we got to address it. And that takes a lot of courage to just say, yeah, I need help on this, or I'm open-minded enough. I mean, we have found, and I know you know this, the most successful people are the people who are open-minded and they know they don't know everything. So, we run the gamut. We talk to people who are super high in finance, and there's still strategies that we can help them with, but they're sitting down with us because they're like, whatever, I don't know everything. What do you got? Right. And I think that's just such an important thing, to stay open and stay curious with any relationship around money. And so I think that's always the biggest thing. It's like, let's just address it. Let's see what's out there, and then we can talk through it and start taking steps. Yeah. And I'll be honest, I haven't dealt with any other financial planners other than yourself, but as far as what I know, you made it so easy for Carrie and I to bring our full selves to the table, and which makes all the difference in the world, right? I'm sure it's a big part of what makes you good at your job, but my experience was that there's no way that we would have been able to really begin that path forward had you not been so understanding and non-judgmental. And really, like, we just told you that we've got that, and you're like, yeah, because you probably see it all the time, but we thought we were the only ones in the world with those problems at the time. So yeah, that means a lot to me. I mean, I think that's, I think empathy is one of the biggest things. And then also non-judgment, super important. And then candor, because sometimes you do have to have a difficult conversation, and that's, and you try and deliver it clearly, but in a, like an encouraging and rolling way of like, hey, this is what's happening. Here's the changes we see that you need to make. Let's have a dialogue about it. So yeah, that means a lot to me. You've been awesome for us. And that's why I'm also happy to just bring you here on the show and to let everyone in the community know about you. Cause as far as I'm concerned, everybody needs a Chris Hempstead in their corner. So listen, man, I want to get you out of here on time. So I'm going to hit you with a few quick hit lightning round style questions. Then you can tell everybody where they can reach you. Sound good? Yep. All right. So what is one thing you've learned in your life that you wish you knew when you were 18? Love myself more. Nice. I like that you didn't choose a financial. That's good. It's all related.
It's all related. That's true.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important value to have as a man?
The most important value, integrity, or authenticity. I think I think authenticity for me.
Love it. And what does the world need most from men right now?
I think listening. I think holding space.
Beautiful, man. Last but not least, where is the best place for people who are excited to get their financial journey started to reach out to you, connect with you, set up a call?
Sure. It'd be great. So I know my name is Chris. My full name is Christopher. So it's the email address is my full name, Christopher, ChristOpher, and then a period, and then Hempstead, hemp like the plant, stead like instead. So HEMPSTEAD at N as in Nancy, M as in Mike.com. So Christopher.Hempstead@nm.com, or you can give me a buzz, 213-243-7062.
Awesome, Chris. Well, we'll make sure we put all that information in the show notes for people to find you as well. Listen, man, I know this was your first, congratulations, your first podcast. You did it. You were awesome.
Right on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. Cause I don't know for sure, but if this episode helped even just one guy begin to get more clear and take more responsibility for his finances, then it's a big difference. It's a big impact.
Totally.
Man. So
it's so important to ask for help and be open.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again. I have a feeling that we haven't seen the last of you here on the show, at least if I have anything to say about it. All my best to your wife and kids and yourself, and I look forward to having you on again soon.
Thanks, Jeddy. Appreciate it. Take care.